Welcome back to Getting Real, the podcast where we go beneath the surface of success and talk about the real stuff, the decisions, the doubts, the defining moments that shape a person. Today, I'm sitting down with Dean Barta, founder and CEO of Barta Business Group, based here in Denver, a firm known for helping entrepreneurs find clarity, confidence, and control in their finances. What makes Dean's story powerful isn't just what he's built, but the way he's choosing to live a life of balance, intention, and quiet leadership, shaped by the discipline of the mountains and the mindset of a guide. Dean, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dan, for inviting me, and I look forward to our conversation. Anything involved with the outdoors and business, I'm always excited to talk about.
Well, let's get into it. This will be fun. Dean, you built a business around guiding others through the financial fog, helping them to create order where there's often chaos. What drew you into this kind of work, being the steady hand versus the lone climber?
Well, one, I think it really originates that I've had a guide mentality since I was a kid. The leader of groups, and of course, my connection with the outdoors. I mean, I grew up on 1,600-acre farm ranch in Montana, so there was no avoiding being in the outdoors. Okay, and embracing all those that happen. So, and also you got to be able to think on your feet when you're in the outdoors, and really, you know, worked in the outdoor industry, the skiing industry, and then adventure travel. Throughout was that same mentality is coming into a situation, and it wouldn't matter if I was a middle manager or I always had a team around me and employees that were working with me that okay, here's a problem. Let's make it, let's make the situation better than how we found it. And I was, 4 years in search and rescue in the Vail Valley, so that was part of, everything. All those streams lead into the same tributary, right? So and so really helping people out. I mean, that's the bottom line, or in some ways, the way I describe it to my clients, we're here to ease your pain. And that's the same vein if it's search and rescue or, you come in as an employee or, hotshot manager maybe. And as a consultant is that there's usually a pain point on, hey, what can we do to get you through that and educate you so that you don't get into that painful situation again.
Well, I usually wait a while to go off script, but I'm interested since you set the table like this. Give me a story about a crazy story around search and rescue or the outdoor adventure space that you ran into, and then give me an example of another crazy story on the business front where you had to sort of jump in and solve the problem.
Okay. Well, one, this is my my personal story about basically freaking out in the outdoors. But I think it relates to how some business owners, you know, entrepreneurs who are starting a new business, and I was in that process of starting a new business, and now I was in the outdoors. I was climbing Devil's Tower, and so this was September of 2010, and my climbing partner was much more experienced than I was, but yeah, still, if you ever anybody knows where Devil's Tower, and it's it's not a walk in the park per se. And anyway, climbed, got up to the top, and everything was working swimmingly until we went to rappel down. And I'm a pretty calm guy. Anxiety is not usually part of my MO, but I got to tell you, my heart was beating, and it's as close to an anxiety attack, or probably was having an anxiety attack. And my climbing partner, he climbed down. He climbed down, and he's like, "Okay, I'm going to set the rope." He asked me, "Do I want to go first?" I'm like, "No, no." And inside, I'm just like, I don't know. I'm here, former search and rescue, and I'm already thinking, I'm not going to be able. We're going to have to call search and rescue to get me off of here.
For
Okay,
me, yeah.
Devil's Tower. I mean, there is 750 feet of open air below you, and so that means several pitches, of course, with a rope. So anyway, he anchors down to the next belay point. He says, "Okay, ready," and I'm like, "Okay," and I'm like literally knees shaking, hands shaking, but I just had to compose myself because I'm like, okay, because my nickname is Safety Dean, so I'm like, okay, double checking my belay device, all that kind of stuff, and back over the edge, and I made one. Which I won't do again, is I went and looked between my legs and saw the 750 feet of open air, and I'm like, nope, stop. And I look at the rock, and I just said, I'm in. So it's about leaning into the fear, right? On rappelling, and leaned into it. And I said, whether it was, ascending or descending, I saw Devil's Tower 6 feet at a time. It was what was in front of me, okay? And how I relate that, it was also the anxiety of starting a new business when I hadn't been a business owner before. And it was the fear of the unknown, right? And it was all, but, in order to be a successful business person, you got to like, okay, knowing that there's risks out there, but just stay in the present. What do I have control over? I have control over that 6 feet on Devil's Tower, right? And and navigate that and did that, those 5 pitches, just like that. And you know, knowing that, you know, I think it's important that you know people look for consultants is if they think they have all the answers, they're probably not a very good consultant. Okay. And that they've never had fear in their life and everything came easy. No, I want the ones that, had the hell scared out of them. Okay. And because they can relate to the fear, maybe as a business owner, that they're having. And we've worked with several businesses. I don't really have only one story. Several is where the business owners, they either had a fear of embezzlement or a person that's been there forever who, you know, they had all the intelligence left with them with the company, and they just said we need to have some stability in an area that most business owners, it's like you draw the last straw when you're in a partnership. Who wants to do finances? That's the short straw, right? Because no one's just said, hell yeah, I'll do that because that's so much fun and so much it's so rewarding. It just doesn't happen. So many a business owner, we come in and one, it's about coming into a situation and asking all the questions. We're not there to just start ripping and tearing their processes apart or anything like that. We learn about what's going on and knowing that they're in a raw, emotional state in some cases, that there's a lot of fear or uncertainty. And then what's rewarding for me and my team is visibly, that visible relief on their face where they're like, oh, I'm so glad you guys are taking care of this. And that's where you talk about it is really easing people's pain. So, you know, I can get into specific stories, but that's in general probably the huge majority of our clients that we're just trying to ease their situation in whatever situation that might be, and that's small, small businesses. That's that could be $100 million revenue type companies, and but the fear is real in all cases for those business owners.
So, talk to me about that journey when you initially made the leap into being a business owner. You mentioned sort of the fears and taking it, say, 5 or 6 feet at a time. Talk to me about that part of your journey, and then I've got a follow up question for you.
Well, of course, it's the business I was starting at the time was, I was a GM of an adventure travel company, 11 years. Okay, so it made sense for me to start a custom adventure travel business. And just, there's the financial fear, okay? There is also the, what if I fail and, I'm embarrassing my family or whatever it might be. And to go from steady paycheck to not steady paycheck, and where one of my clients coined this phrase, he's like, you have to eat what you kill. That is a totally different mentality, and definitely had challenges along with it. But part of the reason I became a business owner is because I've always been a person that just, you know, what's the next thing area of growth for me? And I've had, even since that company, I'd started that company, I had plenty of, associates and friends that I've worked with. They're like, "Hey, we got a great job for you. Come in, be our financial or CFO, controller, whatever it might be." And I refused them all because I said, I would come in, it would feel great for about 6 months. And I said, then I'd be utterly bored because, I've been there, done that. Okay? And being a business owner, especially with Barta Business Group, I get to see different businesses. I like meeting new people on a daily basis. And so it really fits in with who I am and how I kind of approach things that, you know, and yeah, there's some days I have the same fears that I had, 15 years ago. It's not like, they might be a little more tempered, like, okay, I've got this. I have probably, I have more positive history than I have negative history. So, I remind myself of like, yeah, there's challenges with every business owner. You have challenges, but it's just all in how we approach it and try to
At
not.
least you can say I'm not dangling 750 feet up from the ground.
Yeah, it's not. It's less of a, in business, it's probably less of a life and death situation. That,
There you go.
I don't have a fear of falling. I have a fear of hitting the ground. Really.
So you mentioned your nickname was Safety Dean. Is that right?
Huh? Yeah.
How do you bring that safety mentality into how you work with clients and give them that sort of reassurance?
Well, part of it is, especially on our, fractional CFO work, is we're there to protect the blind side of the company. Okay. So the word protect, right? We're like that prized left tackle in football, right? If you could have a star quarterback, but if you don't have a great left tackle, things are going to go badly, right? So it's protecting. Protecting is, okay, here are the different options. Here's the really positive pie in the sky, we're going to hit these goals. Here's the middle, and here is like, if it absolutely hits the fan, this is what. And it's giving options and being that partner. And sometimes, and this is actually fun for us, is when we're working with those business owners and businesses that they're moving and shaking, they're running, okay, and we're kind of like keeping them between the white lines, on the road, so they're not driving from ditch to ditch, and and just kind of in really guiding them and just keeping the guardrails on, because some really need that to say, no, you don't need to spend $250,000 on that particular purchase because the ROI is showing that it's not, unless it's some moonshot that's going to happen, your percentage of hitting that is just, you know, very low. I've had actually many a spouse of the business owners were consulted to. Thank God you guys are there because, he has a tendency to keep driving off the road. And it just stresses us out as a family when, that's just, the spouse doesn't want to take that kind of risk. But that's an important conversation that we have with business owners too, is that, hey, what are your personal goals that are associated with the business goals? And like having a conversation, really, let's bring in your spouse because, hey, they're part of that. They're part of that business team, whether they're an employee or not, right? Because they're fully invested. Yeah. So yeah, I would say that we take a more, hey, stay safe, protective approach, and because I don't know of anybody who says who recommends Yeah, as far as a finance professional, I want them to be the wild cowboy and like, shooting for the moon. There's an old saying, there's old climbers and there's bold climbers, but there's no old bold climbers. So, you know,
Yeah. I saw that. What was the documentary Free Climb? Was that it?
yeah,
Man,
yeah,
that
yeah, that's
I was watching it on a plane, and the two people sitting next to me, they were going nuts because we were all just focused in on my little screen. It takes a lot of guts to.
well, it's interesting about watching that particularly documentary film Alex Hanold is that he survives, right? But I'm still freaked out when he's doing that special move because I feel like he could fall, but it's kind of like, well, the Titanic sinks, but it's still an exciting story.
Yeah. Free solo. I'm sorry, I said free climb.
Free solo, right,
Free
right.
solo. So, talk to me about how the fractional executive business has sort of evolved over time since you've entered this space.
Well, definitely there was a change when it comes to virtual work versus in person. And it was gravitating in that direction before COVID, before 2020. But there's a lot more. y- Certainly, onboarding in some cases it might still happen in person, but a lot of it's still going to be virtual because honestly with screen sharing and all that, I mean, and a lot of systems that are in the cloud. In fact, it's dubious anymore that you should have anything that's resonant on a server, a server in your dusty third office or something like that. And so that has changed. And I think what has changed too is that there's a lot more players in that game, and it can be very competitive, and there's some that are more qualified than others, and we approach it is I'm very particular, and I cherry pick talent, and the youngest person on my team is 45. I want people who've worked with a lot of different industries, who, have, and actually how we really market people to business owners is we're actually business owners guiding business owners. So we know that we've been there. We know that fear instead of someone who might have said, "Hey, I'm going to be a virtual CFO. I've been a CFO for corporate or whatever," and they decide to get into their own gig. Maybe it's a side gig, maybe it is their full time gig, and they only know one type of business. And they're trying to apply what they know in, say, manufacturing to a service based business. And, you can't really step in those same shoes, So, and I think actually the evolution of how I think when fractional CFO or fractional executive work, it used to be a lot more task oriented where okay, get me these reports and all of that, cash flow forecasting and working on analysis for M&A and all that. And I think the fractional work, whether it's even COO or CFO work, has evolved into what I mentioned before. What is your personal goals? How does that roll into what you're trying to do as a business? Because if you're trying to push the business one way, but your personal goals are not lining up with that, so I think there's a lot of executive coaching level that goes with that too, and that's why I bring on a very experienced people because there's no substitute for experience. The gray hair proves it, right? So it's we've all seen and seen plenty of things, and, I have the luxury of when we have a different type of business come to us is I'm really matchmaking because I can have a electrical contractor out of Metro Dallas and I look at my team. Okay, who's got electrical contractor experience? Oh yeah, I do, and I'm located on the other side of Dallas. So it's fun for me to match up the right personalities and with the business too, so that they're getting the highest quality person, at consultant, and it's not someone who's just polar opposite to what they are.
What would you say is like a worst case scenario client versus a best case scenario client?
The worst case scenario client is that they, one, are not engaged with their business. They know there's a problem, but they're just like, here, just fix it, and meaning fix it and just tell me how it turns out, or, another worst case is that they're such a micromanager that everything is, well, why did you do this one little step and all that? And it's, that's a swing from side to side. Our ideal client and the ones that we really like, they're engaged, but they know they have good teams around them, and they just need to get them over the hump in certain areas. Or they're looking at, hey, we want to grow this 10x, like 10x in the next year or two, and we don't have people on staff that have that kind of ability. I know my business really well. I know where we want to go. Help me provide the strategy and the planning, and let's work the numbers so that, is that going to really happen? Or, in some cases, we can validate what they already think that can happen. So using the basis of numbers and projections and strategy to say, yeah, that's definitely feasible, or no, that's a more of like a 2 year to 3 year plan, not in 1 year. But business owners that are engaged and they know what they don't know. They know they're good at this part, but they're not great about this section of the business. And so they bring in the expertise because in many cases, in especially service-based businesses, that's why their clients are hiring them, because they have the expertise. So they understand the value of that. And I have an example, Dan, that I've used for years now is I can install a dishwasher, okay, and it won't leak, but it takes me 3 hours to do it. Okay? You bring in someone who charges you whatever, $150, $200 to install a dishwasher because they can get it done in 20 minutes. Okay, because I don't want to spend 3 hours doing it. Okay, it's
And you
not
know it's not gonna
value. Yeah, and it's the same result, but there's a vastly different time difference, and it's diverting me. That 3 hours is diverting me away from value added to whatever I would want to be doing, working on my business, family time, etc. So to me, that's valuable when business owners know, hey, I'm not great at installing a dishwasher. I'm going to pay the money. Let's bring in someone who knows how to do it, knows how to do it right, and it will save me time and money in the long run.
That's great. The next question I have for you is, when you got started, did you have an idea of what success was versus what you think success is now? How has that evolved over time? Just your idea of success. Is it the same as it was?
I think right now, how it was different. I thought, yeah, it was, first becoming a business owner, success was just about dollars and people. Okay, how many people and how many dollars, and that was more bottom line. And to me, that was okay. That's how I would judge how well I'm, doing. And really, what has evolved for me is that, and which has kept me, in this game for a while, is that, it's the personal connection and just seeing the changes and the results. And what I mentioned before is that it's easing people's pain. Gosh, I mean, I would do that for free, because some of that stuff is really priceless. Because I can say, hey, I made a difference that, this business owner, this management team can spend more time with their family and worry less about their business now. And, you know, wouldn't matter what X amount of dollars they spent with me. If they're getting that value, that's, probably 10, 20x of what, they expected. And so there's a lot more, pride, if you will, in hey, how did that client, how do they feel? Are they feeling better about their business or themselves or their strategy than before they, were exposed to us?
So as you think about your business over the next 12 months, what aspirations do you have for yourself, and what challenges stand in your way?
I still have benchmarks I work on, and really the challenge is how we can reach more people who need our kind of service. Okay, and you know, it's through various methods. I mean, podcasts are fun for me. I enjoy them, um, and because it also, you know, I think it gives people an opportunity to see who I am and not just go into a website, and I have, small videos on a website, people can get a snippet of it. But if they watch a podcast for, 20 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever it might be, they get a pretty good idea of who I am and what my values are. So I think every year has a certain challenges, no matter how the economic winds are blowing. And it's just how we approach it and how we stay flexible. And even back during during COVID, the overused term that a lot of people used was pivot. You just need to pivot. Well, to me, pivot was never a very accurate word, because pivot means I'm going to do it the same way. I'm just turning it 10 degrees a different direction. Okay. And I like to use the word flexible. Can we flex to where, okay, we know we're doing it this way, and we had this huge challenge. How can we still provide a service, but we got to flex? And actually, a good example is restaurants, right? They might have been, hey, we've never done takeout, never, and they said we have to do takeout because they're still serving the quality food, and they still wanted to have a quality experience for their clientele. And some of them they still are doing takeout now, because they're like, we were able to make it a more personalized experience and serve people. And some people it wasn't pickup, they were delivering to people's homes. And I've heard stories about it, people like, hey, you're the during deep into COVID, they were like, "You're the only person I've talked to, the delivery person, all day long."
Yeah.
And so they were thankful, and they remembered that restaurant that had that personal experience. So they took they were have how they were delivering food and an experience became different, but so they were flexible, but it still was in the same vein of their
It was a really interesting time just to see how those businesses had to step up. I remember getting showered here in Denver. There's a place called Grammy's Goodies, and they would just shower you with garlic nuts and cheesecake every time you ordered. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna get some rigatoni again next week.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's, I've done talks on this too, is about the emotional intelligence in customer service. And because I think that people, if you have an incident with a business, is people will remember how you responded to the incident more so than the incident. So if you had a poor experience at the restaurant and maybe your server wasn't great or the food wasn't great or whatever, you'll remember how that manager handled it and said, "Okay, we're going to comp your meals," or, "Hey, come back. Well, we're going to give us another chance. We're going to comp and we'll give you, $100 next time for your family." They're going to remember that and come back, rather than, "Ah, that was just a terrible experience and that manager didn't help us out at all. Whew, missed opportunity."
That's a really good lesson from this. It's really how you respond. It's not what happened. It's how you respond to it.
Yeah, yeah. So that's
So
just,
along
out of personal experience. So,
along that lines, talking about emotional intelligence, are there any books that stand out to you over the course of your career that you come back and lean on?
too many, but actually, I've driven I've gotten a lot of value out of actually Simon Sinek's, Start with Why. And his, Start with Why talk, which, was a TED talk before the book, because that really, I've actually fashioned a little bit out of that, out how to find your purpose out of that kind of same sequence. But I think that's an important book. There's so many good ones out there. I've been a fan of Yvon Chouinard of Patagonia. Let My People Go Surfing. I've probably read that book 2 or 3 times, and I've never met him in person, but I've followed him and his approach to business since I think it was about a 1989 Outside Magazine article about him. In fact, I think I still have that article, believe it or not. Uh, yeah, it's one of those keepers. I mean, those are the first two books. I mean, there's plenty of great ones out there, but one that focuses on as a business, why you're doing it, that what the purpose of the business is, and because they'll remember the why instead of the what and how, and really, the basis of Chouinard's book is about just treating your people right, you know, and because everything starts with the people that you have. Um, I mean, you can have great service, but great service works best when it's the people who are serving the client. And I take a page out of Undercover Boss. Okay, it's a great program because you basically have a founder that was working with clients, and then he grew, and then the founder becomes very insulated from the frontline employees. So what does he do? Disguises, works with the frontline employees, work with the people that are right there with the client and can tell you what that experience, and then you're building, okay, we're building a better experience from the client and the client facing employees first. So, that's a valuable lesson for any business owner.
What are the cornerstones that you build the culture of your business on?
Integrity. You have to be a high integrity, and this is, probably my farm background. I have a, blue collar work ethic and white collar. And, you know, you say you're going to do something, you damn well better do it, and, it's, being a high integrity person. And we've gone into many a business where the financial issue they're having is that they didn't have a high integrity person there. And, either embezzlement of money, systems and things that were just, horrifically installed that never, and, or the owner just abdicated to that person and we gave them way, way too much responsibility and they ran the business, or tried to run the business off the cliff. So really, integrity, responsive communication is. I have a. I call it the. We practice the art of accounting. See, the art is, usually even when we come in as a CFO, they usually have like a bookkeeping or accounting issue that needs to be solved, and it's usually ART is an acronym. So they either have an accuracy problem, a responsiveness communication problem, or T is timely financials. Okay, that's art. Accuracy, responsiveness, or timeliness, and we like to come in and solve that, but we also approach it our own way. Is like, hey, let's be honest with our dealings. We're highly responsive because you've got to have the timely reporting that you need in order to make good business decisions. So, and another R actually is just reliability. And I'll go back to the prize left tackle in football, right? Hey, are they reliable? Are they consistent? Are they, they're going to be there, rather than are they going to show up today? That kind of thing. So, but that's all, integrity, and you not only have to do it, I mean, I practice what I preach, and my team, is seasoned, but I hold a high standard for them too, and they rise to that occasion.
If I'm a business owner, my business is growing, are there any common trigger points where it's like, this it probably makes sense for me to bring in a fractional CFO at this point? What are those sort of common fires that you're putting out right away?
Yeah, it's usually they don't have either the systems or the personnel in order to scale their business, and they may have the business that's either waiting to come in or it's coming in at such a volume. It's like the proverbial drinking out of a fire hose, but they can't handle it because they don't have either the people or the systems in place, or where they're at financially on, hey, can we afford to buy that piece of equipment or add two or five employees in order to handle that influx? So they are lacking that expertise of someone who, can come in and give that analysis and help them navigate that period of time. But usually it comes down to just, you know, people and systems. But they try to fix it with probably, whoever they have internally. It's hard to, let's say you have your basement is flooding and you're bailing it out, but the water level's here. It's hard to be objective when you're bailing and the water's here. When you have someone else that comes in, hey, if we hook up that hose and we start pumping, we bring this pump down and we start pumping it out, then you're not going to have to bail. You're just like, the water's here and I'm just going to keep bailing, So they don't have a lot of time usually, the employees, to say, because they're just trying to just do their own work, let alone try to handle the influx of, new business and systems and processes. So
Have you seen it the other way where a business might be more mature and they sort of have a CFO and they opt into fractional CFO, where they're just like, I think we can just outsource this on a different basis? Or is it usually on the way up?
it's usually on the way up. Now we have a client that is a very mature business. They've been, roofing for in the roofing business for 33 years, okay? And they've had a person that could get them reports but not analysis, because they're looking at exiting their business. And so we're helping them on, hey, you got to have really solid financials and all that, especially the last 3 years, right? So that you can say, hey, this is one, it's a turnkey business that people would, want to come in, and it's not going to be a bunch of headaches, and it's not, Joe and Sue that, gosh, once Joe and Sue leaves, it's like everyone's like, well, I'm leaving, Joe and Sue aren't, so that's what I mean by a turnkey is there's processes, but it's not a heavily dependent on the owner's kind of business. Okay. So we help with exit strategies and usually I tell people, if you want to exit, that's about a 2 or 3 year plan in order to exit. If you want to exit in 6 months, you know, we could probably still help you, but there's so many things that we think you're probably going to cut yourself short on valuation
Right. So
dramatically.
what is it? Not to say that there's a set number, but if you're a business owner and you're thinking about exiting without bringing somebody in to clean that up, the difference from an ROI standpoint on when you go to sell is significant, right?
Well, yeah, it can be. And because if you just say, hey, I'm at the end of, this year, I'm going to sell my business. Okay. The systems aren't in place. There's not a good transition process. And hey, if we look when we work with clients, even if they're a business that's been in business 3 years, we talk about exit strategy. I said because we've seen when we have business owners that focus on exit strategy, 3 years or 30 years, their whole mindset to their business changes because they approach it because all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is going to make my business more valuable if it's not highly dependent on me. And I said, build it so that you have the choice. If you want to go another 20 years and do it, you have that choice, but you have the choice to step out. When you've been so involved with a business for such a long time and it all revolves around what you are doing, it just has less value. And because I've, worked with business owners that had no experience with an electrical business, but they wanted to buy one, and they would only buy one that if it was a turnkey experience, that the processes were in place, things were, it didn't just revolve. So, how you quantify that? Well, it really depends on the size of the company, but if you get 10% more value out of even a $1 million company, you went from million to million one, and you spent, 30, 40,000 on a fractional CFO to get you there. That's a pretty good ROI. So, And that's what, some folks can look at, like a fractional CFO or fractional CEO and say, "Oh, I can't afford them." And it's like, well, let's run some quick numbers. If let's say you're a $5 million company, to have a great fractional CFO at the very minimum, it's going to be 150K a year. Okay, and that's and then generally they're doing a lot of other things, besides just financial type work, and they're mostly like doing stuff that's well below their pay grade, that it's not high value, and so you're paying 150,000 plus. Let's add another 20% on that just for employee benefits and taxes, et cetera. So, now you're at, 180. Well, you bring in a fractional CFO. Let's say you're paying them, 5 to 8,000 a month. So let's say at the bottom, it's 5,000. So that's $60,000 a year. And and some of that lower end stuff that your CFO is doing, you have the financial controller, the bookkeeper, the accounting staff. They take over that, at a much lower rate. So all of a sudden, let's say it's round up and say you're paying out 100,000, with your fractional CFO at 60, and then another 40 of just paying your other people to take care of all that stuff. You're at 100,000 versus 180. So already in the first year, you're saving $80,000, and you're getting more specialized service. Your people who were, probably making, 60 or 70K, they were doing stuff. They took over some of the lower end stuff that the CFO was working on. Maybe they're making 80K now. Okay, great. They're happy. They're making more because they're like, oh, I took that on. That was easy. I can just roll that into my current thing. And it's as easy at that of a calculation, really. And the business owner has that specialized person in the CFO that they're like, okay, you're, in some cases, we come in and kind of oversee the accounting department to make sure that everything's done right, because we can't provide good numbers and strategy if the numbers are not accurate. So we have a vested interest to make sure that that data is right as well. So that's how I calculate the numbers. I think it's it's a simple, but I think it's a pretty accurate, off thumbnail way of like, yeah, okay, I can see the ROI on that.
Makes sense to me. Yeah, I'm just surprised more people don't think about doing that, because it seems like it's a pretty logical play.
Well, and it's a mindset, because if they've only ever had employees before, and they've once again, it's getting back to, do they just need, they're looking at it as a pivot, or being flexible, like, hey, let's use something that we can get the benefit that we want out of it and the value out of those dollars. And I mean, I'm a big ROI guy in, hey, does that new employee pay for themselves? What's the ROI on that employee, or that equipment, or that, buying that building? Because everything has a value, and everything should have a very positive whatever X return.
So we've covered a lot today. I think this is a pretty fun conversation. I have a bunch of questions I always like to hit during my conversations. One of them that I haven't asked you yet is, what is the impact of AI with your business?
We were just discussing that as a team last week. AI, as far as processes and analysis, uh, certainly can be assist. Now, the technology I know is, growing exponentially. And this is, from, my team too. They said, but it's not there. I mean, you still have to check over anything that AI is doing to make sure that it's actually right, and the assumptions might be right. And it was universal that through my team is, yeah, we'll see that we can utilize AI, but we don't, as a business, we don't see that it would replace us, because I don't, because we're so personally invested in our clients, that, like I said, personal goals and their strategy goals. And hey, maybe they have a sick child that, they need to, build revenue in their business so they can pay medical bill. No AI at this juncture, I don't, could, is going to have that level of empathy and an understanding to, that, that's in any business is, can you get a robot to serve you food? Yes. Can you get a robot, can you, how is that compared to Mario, who works at the Italian restaurant and he's been doing this for 20 years and and his parents are from Sicily and he grew up in the kitchen, and, you know, and yeah, it might be the same food, but it's not the same experience as having that person, because people using a restaurant, they're doing it because of the experience. And really, I think when businesses are looking at fractional work or fractional CFO work, is let's talk about the person that's going to be working on it. Or as we like to say, we give a care about what's going on with that business. And sometimes, I've had discussions with clients because it felt like we cared more than they did, and I was like, "Hey, come on, you could do this," So, that's where a little bit of the coaching is, but that's what a good teammate does, right? Is picks people up when they may be having a bad situation happen.
You've written about climbing mountains, not corporate ladders. What does that metaphor mean to you today? And how can others find their own mountain to climb without losing themselves in the process?
Well, part of what that when I wrote about that, it was it's about a discussion I had, and they asked me this certain question, and this is way back when, okay, and this is 1988. I said, basically, do you want to sit in front of a computer 8 hours a day? Now, granted, this is 1988, and I said, no, because it was against my value. That's not how I want to spend my time. And literally 2 months later, I'm working for, an outdoor related company. And what it taught me is, it's not about just, ascending the corporate ladder. The story is about values. Is, inside of you what feels right and what's wrong. And it's something, even when I managed a guide staff and worked with a guide staff, is when I first started working there, they would call me at whatever time, and they'd ask me like I'm the human Google, okay? And finally I just said, "What do you think the right thing is to do?" And they're like, "Well, I would do this." I said, "Do it." And I literally, 9.9 times out of 10, they did it better than I would even suggest. So, because and when you hire good people and you say, make the right decision, do what's right, and they'll make the right decision. So yeah, it's understanding how people operate, and really there's just a lot of goodness out there that people know how to handle it and do the right thing by people.
If you have the right people, right?
If you have the right people. Yes.
If you have the right people. When it's all said and done, what do you hope people say about how you live, not what you've built, but how you showed up?
That Dean was a high integrity guy, and eased, my pain as a business owner, as a friend. I Having me in their life was a positive to them.
Safe, caring, and a good storyteller.
Hey, one of the reasons I went into the outdoor industry and had that opportunity is, gosh, I have a lot of stories. It's so much fun because I used this challenge, Dan. I said, and ask anybody who might listen to this podcast, is reach out to me if you've ever gone to a funeral and they talked about their balance sheet and income statement and how many assets they had. It's about what kind of stories they had, what kind of experience they had with that person, and what the quality of the person was. And to me, that's, if you want to really go to a funeral and look at it and like, okay, how do you want people to be talking about you? And that'll help kind of put anybody on the right track. So
Well, this has been awesome, Dean. I really appreciate it. It's exactly what I aim for with Getting Real. It's what the show's all about. Being intentional, grounded, and human while chasing growth. So, for anyone that's listening, if they want to connect with you, or learn more about your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can reach out to my website at bartabusinessgroup.com. You can email me at dean@bartabusinessgroup.com or call me. And Dan, I think podcasts like yours are so important because you're helping extract valuable information that might help a business owner or even a person, you know, getting real is it's like, hey, we can live in fantasy land because of all the medium that we have to at our disposal, but it's really getting real with ourselves and learning about how other people have really lived their lives in integrity can really help them live in integrity as well.
Appreciate that. I just think that there's so much more to a person than what you see on a website or on the LinkedIn profile. And having a show like this, you get to meet who everybody is. So it's been a real pleasure talking with you, Dean. I appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And I'll make sure that all of your information's in the show notes. This has been a hell of a climb. So I appreciate it, Dean.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Dan. Keep adventuring out there and love the work that you're doing. Okay.
Great. Thanks for getting real.
Bet.